Welcome, this is Najma Minhas for Global Village Space. I'm joined today by Javed Hassan, the chairman of the Economic Advisory Group. We're looking at Moody changing the outlook for Pakistan to negative. Javed, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me, Najma.
Javed, what are the implications of what Moody has just done?
The implications are not as dire as if they had changed the rating. Essentially, what they're giving is a sort of warning that things are not looking great. They've laid it out, essentially concerns about the credit markets in overseas or international markets not being available to Pakistan, the political outlook being slightly negative, and there's obviously generally concerns about the liquidity crunch that on the external balances that Pakistan might face. So those are the reasons it's pointed out. I personally think it's actually quite they're being quite conservative. If you look at the credit default swap, it's anything between, for 1 year credit default swap, it's something like anything between 13 to 15%, and that effectively is putting a rating of D or default. So Moody's is being conservative, but they tend to be conservative. They don't tend to.
What's the difference between the rating and the outlook?
Outlook is the overall environment, and it tends to be a precursor to a change in rating. If there's a sudden improvement in the overall outlook, then they'll probably go back to being stable. If there's a deterioration, this is the first step to actually cutting a rating.
And then, so you're saying that we don't need to worry as much because right now the fact that they've cut just the outlook is not as bad as cutting the rating itself. Okay, so tell me, what is the impact had they cut the rating, which is what you're saying, that this is usually a precursor. The next step is they'll probably do the ratings if it happens. What will that mean? What are the implications for Pakistan?
It means your borrowing costs becomes even more expensive. Having said that, the markets are already discounting much worse than what Moody's would suggest. If you look at the market rating, implied rating on Pakistan bonds, say the 2023 Sukuk, even the 5-year bonds, they're trading at anything between 17% dollar return to 22%. So those are effectively default ratings at implied ratings. Essentially, if you work it back, what kind of bonds trade at those ratings? It tends to be junk bonds or defaulted entities that have that kind of returns.
And if we join the IMF, does that mean that our rating might improve or our outlook might improve?
Definitely, if we are back in the EFF, the Extended Fund Facility Program, which is currently under review by the IMF team in Pakistan and Washington, then our outlook would definitely improve. There's a great chance that the credit lines that are for the moment quite sticky, are difficult to get internationally, they will open up. We will also possibly get friendly countries giving us some further funding, some rollovers which were meant to happen, which are right now on hold. They will potentially happen. We have to understand there's a financing requirement in terms of repayments of loans over the next 12 months of something like $18 billion. On top of that, there's a current account deficit of something like $12 billion. So we have financing requirements of close to $30 billion just over the next 12 months. So we have huge need to go to international markets and potential help from multilateral agencies as well as friendly countries.
Now, Pakistan has just raised its petrol prices by 30 rupees. I think we're selling petrol around 180 per litre right now, rupees per litre. So what is the IMF still waiting for?
If you look at the wording of IMF's statement after the Doha talks, which just ended recently, they're very careful in how they word things. They say substantive discussions took place and we expect further discussions. But one thing they very clearly said, we expect the subsidies on fuel to be removed, and they're also adherence to what the agreements have been. Now we have to understand the subsidy removal will mean just the subsidy removal, potentially on petrol another 25 to 30 rupees hike, and on diesel similarly another 25 to 30 rupees hike. So we're not quite there, just even on the fuel subsidy. Now our sixth review, we had agreed to also institute PDL. That is part of the Extended Fund Facility Agreement. That PDL.
So what is PDL?
Petroleum duty levies.
Okay.
And that has to be also instituted. So that probably adds another 35-40 rupees. On top of that, there is GST. So we have to, that's about 17.5%. So there's all of that that needs to happen before we have a staff level agreement. On top of that, we have to have agreement on budget deficit targets for the coming year, FY23. Again, obviously, I'm not privy to what those numbers are, but I understand IMF wants a much more conservative figure than what the government would like to see. This means that we have to cut down on spendings. We also, it's not enough simply to cut down on spendings. We also have to find new avenues for generating revenues. And that is something in today's press, one of the things that is under contention. So we are not quite there with IMF in terms of.
And when you say EFF, new areas, I mean, what kind of potential areas are they thinking of?
Well, for a start, in terms of just income tax, one of the things is.
Well, that's not new. I mean, it's the same old people getting taxed again and again.
Unfortunately, in Pakistan, there's a very narrow base. And when you say new, it's basically the same old people getting hit more. So there's talk of something like 30% minimum tax on everyone. There could be new taxes in terms of GST, what has been previously not instituted. There could be moves to see whether provinces can have more property tax. So there really has to be a great deal of movement in terms of revenue generation. Finally, there also has to be some cuts. Not enough cuts have been instituted. The numbers being talked about are still about 800 billion of PSDP, that's the public sector development spending. Given the kind of constraints we have in terms of fiscal deficit, it's difficult to see how we can have that kind of large PSDP spending. So we have to see a period of extreme austerity, and we have to remember we have a government which has a very slim majority. It doesn't necessarily have the kind of political capital which is required to do the very tough things that need to be done in Pakistan over the next 1.5 years.
So do you see this happening then?
It's a close call. I really, it's impossible. I would not, bet my house on it happening.
Okay, just a final question I have for you. Apparently, Pakistan cannot secure credit loans for oil either. What does that mean for Pakistan?
Well, as I said, the credit default swaps are already close to are at levels which are considered default. So the banks, commercial banks internationally, are trading. They would be their compliance, their risk assessors would have said to whoever the lenders are that look, you can't really lend to Pakistan. So effectively, credit lines are, I don't know if they're closed, but they're definitely sticky. They're not as easily available as they used to be. And that would mean that we would have to make cash payments on getting oil, such essentials like oil and food. And that's a very tricky situation to be. That's not how normally trade operates. Trade operates on credit facilities. And if those credit facilities start getting shut, our ability to trade will significantly decline. So these are difficult times, and we really have to be very clear. These are very, very difficult times, and we hope to get out of it soon. So Moody's outlook change actually is very conservative. It's not as bad as the situation on ground potentially is.
The market's also pricing in the default for Pakistan, as you mentioned yourself.
Yeah.
What does that mean on a ground level for the average Pakistani?
Well, it's beginning to be seen. What you're seeing is rupee depreciation. It's gone down from just a few months back, 178, where it was quite stable. It's around close to 200, and depending on political environment, starts falling again or starts slightly rising, but it's not really getting much better than 200. It's more likely to worsen from here. That would mean an inflationary impact. We know for a fact that essentials like oil and edible oil and ghee and atta, all of those things are becoming much more expensive. Inflation level, while officially it's about 13.6% as per Pakistan Bureau of Statistics, in reality it probably is much higher, and we're going to see the full effects of that in the coming months. So in terms of ordinary lives, our incomes are, especially for the lower middle class, people who are earning less than say 60,000-70,000, their income is basically being cut down because food inflation impacts that kind of household most.
Javed, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you for having me.